den rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
I would like to talk about the future of car mobility in the next 2 decades. And for me, there is a rather huge reason to do that. I just am new in the field of academia. I published my thesis 4 years ago, which the thesis was about the car-dependent society. It was in Dutch. And I had the possibility to translate it in an English book with Ashgate, The Car-Dependent Society, A European Perspective. I wrote that book because for me car dependence was very important. I had a career as a director of also the Transport Research Institute in the Netherlands, but more as a managing director and in the field of environment. And I was a member of parliament. And in that time our family did grow up and I had to drive our children, our 2 daughters, to lots of places, and I don't like driving that much. So I asked myself, why am I all the time driving, especially with kids, because I was accustomed to go out in the woods and play everywhere. And well, my children were driven to friends, to hobbies, to everything in between. And then I started really thinking about what is happening to society related to a car and to car use. So that's basically my orientation to write and to tell this story to you. I asked myself 7 questions when we talk about the future of car mobility, and I would also like to answer those questions. The first question is, looking at cars, will the normal car, the car that we know now for years, will this car remain? Well, my answer is probably. It's clear that the car has been a very resilient subject. The car has changed, has become more environmental friendly, has become more energy friendly. The car has lots of extra comfort in its style and in its setup. That's one. But there's also an element of stagnation in the car, the normal car. I have to explain that word, I think. Stagnation is a combination of stagnation and innovation. Well, the stagnation is the fact that the car is more or less still doing the same sort of things as it did in the 50s. That basically hasn't changed. The whole setup of cars haven't changed. But there was innovation. There was innovation in that small area of stagnation. We innovated a lot, and the car industry innovated a lot. And probably there is a plea to make that they will keep innovating, getting more energy-friendly cars and so on and so forth. So that's about the normal, conventional car that we have now. Well, the second question is, again on cars, will electric mobility do the job? Well, electric mobility is lots about hope. Everybody hopes that electric mobility will be the future because it looks so nice, it looks so friendly. There is a sort of deus ex machina element in that electric mobility. We tried it for already a century ago. There was electric mobility. 50 years ago we talked about electric mobility, and we're doing it again at this moment. But when you really look at what has to be changed in the field of infrastructure on electric mobility, that's really a lot. And it's questionable whether the organizations that have to change together, the car industry, the infrastructure providers, the people that do the work on batteries, the research areas, whether they all fit together to make a good business case. And even when they make a good business case, let's be clear on one element that is often forgotten when we talk about electric mobility. And that's how long it takes before a car park is changed. In the Netherlands, and I think in France and in Germany, it now takes something from 14 to 16 years before a car park has changed. Well, that was before the crisis. With the crisis, we now move with 30% less car purchases, which means that the time will be longer. Well, having said that, you then talk about changing the car park towards electric mobility will take first the years to have a business case, and then something like 16 to 20 years, which means that somewhere around 2035, 2040, we really have electric mobility. Well, the third one, will it be smart mobility? You know, smart mobility is about lots of IT in cars. Cars that can speak to each other, cars that can speak with the road, cars that get lots of data, and you have all sort of, basically the car becomes a sort of IT product. Well, possible. But how many people really want to purchase such a car? There's also a question to be put. Because basically that cars are rather expensive still, will become cheaper, but there is a big group of younger people that are basically looking for basic mobility and not for all those IT in cars, because they already have the ITs on their iPhones, they have the ITs on their smartphones, and they will have the IT everywhere else, so they don't need it on the dashboard. It's needed on the dashboard for the group of older people. But there you have a split, because the elderly don't need all those travel information. They just go on journey after congestion time and so on and so forth. So they need safety, which is another story. And the middle group, of the middle ages, well, they, who mostly drive lease cars, they really want IT cars. So there is also here questionable, what will be the situation? Well, to sum up those three questions, it's rather unclear what sort of cars we will be driving in the next 20 years. Well, is that important? Well, basically it's important how the future of car mobility would look like. Car mobility is now good for 80% of all the miles or other kilometers traveled in our Western societies. And we are facing lots of big problems. We are facing the problem of oil delivery. Will oil, fossil fuel, be there all the time in the next 2 decades? Or will we have real problems with the delivery of oil? We have the problem of climate change. But look at it, that really in 2050 you need a 60 to 80% reduction in CO2 compared to 1995. Well, all the scenarios that we have say, well, we can reach probably something like 50%, but nobody has a story on how to reach those 80% or those 70% on CO2. So that's a problem. Well, the third problem is the car dependence. The car dependence that I wrote a book about, because people that have no car, for them it's now not that problematic, but it will become more problematic when car dependency will still grow, and star dependency is still growing. So the non-car households will face problems getting to services with their accessibility to all sort of situations. That's rather clear. Well, are there signs that we really change car mobility? Yes, a lot. We are entering a phase of saturation of the growth of the car mobility. In the last years, especially in Germany, you see the saturation. Not that much in the Netherlands. France is more or less in between. And then we are now talking about, can we reach at a certain moment a sort of situation of peak car, that the car will not grow in the number of kilometers traveled. What I find interesting is the whole situation of the attitude of the younger people who say, well, yes, at a certain moment we need a car, we need a driving license. Getting driver's license at 18 is slowing down at the moment, but we need a car. But it can be a rather stripped car. We need a sort of basic mobility. We don't need all the gadgets, all the comfort that our parents had in the car. That's one element. The other element is that they say, well, we don't need to own the car. We can do far more in car sharing. Well, it's questionable whether that will stay as really a big trend, or that the trend has something to do with the crisis, something to do with less money and so on and so forth. It's not completely clear, but it's an interesting sign, I think. What is also interesting is that the idea of multimodality. Well, why is car still important? Let's do the exchange between public transport, cars, and all sort of other modes. Well, basically lots of academic people and lots of technicians talk about it relatively easy, but it's not easy at all. Look at it from a financial point of view. You already have paid for your car. Each year you pay a lot for your car. The car stands there, so the car has to be used, like your refrigerator. On the other hand, when you then go and say, well, I leave the car, I go this day by public transport, you have to pay the whole price for public transport, because you don't get all those funny elements that people get who are going by public transport each and every day. So you basically pay twice. And when we are not able to succeed in overcome the financial problems that are faced with multimodality, multimodality is just another gadget, another idea to talk about, but not something that really changes car mobility in some way or another. That's are the big issues of today. Well, the sixth question is, are politicians, I've been a politician as I said myself, are politicians really interested in all the material that I talk about? Well, basically not. That has to do with the fact that most politicians in our Western societies are aiming at happiness and acceptance, more acceptance than happiness, with the big majority. And the big majority is the middle classes. The middle classes are 60 to 70% of their electorate. And they look at the middle classes. The middle classes only have one problem. They can always afford somewhere a car, even 2 cars. But they have one problem, and that's congestion. So basically the politicians are not busy with thinking about climate change for the 60 to 80%. You don't hear them very much about oil. They find that a far too difficult subject to really discuss and frame. You don't hear them quite often with the non-car households, which are mostly, not all, certainly not all, poorer households. But you hear them each and all the time about accessibility framed in getting as speedy as possible from city A to city B. And you hear them about congestion. And basically congestion is only a problem because we have created such an arrangement in society that the timing of society is at the same moment 8 to 10 or 7 to 10. You have the rush hour because all the factories, all the offices and all the services start at that moment. Well, we could do that in another way, but it seems to be rather difficult to do it in another way. That brings me to a big element where I would like to see politicians coming in, and that's timing of society. Time is very important. We are facing time stress, at least the people that work, lots of the households face time stress. And time stress, the big helper in time stress, is always the car. Because with the car you can rush around pretty easily. The car is flexible and is the only possibility for time stress. Well, the bike in the Netherlands and in Denmark also is helping in time stress, but other elements like public transport are not basically helping. So we need a sort of timing and reframing of timing in society. That's basically, I think, very important.
Seite sowie den Außenbereich den rechten.